4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Glenn Mauer, and today we're going to host the show, Next Step Show, and discuss some local Santa Barbara prehistory, I suppose you might say, in history, with my guest, John Johnson, who's a curator from the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. But before I get to that show, I want a couple of announcements. One, if you want to see this show on your home computer or otherwise can't get access to the cable television show, you can go to Ustream TVSB, do a Google search on that, and you can find all the shows that we recorded and take a peek if you're interested in this show or any other show. And if you're interested in the show or have suggestions for other shows or comments, please feel free to contact me at glennmauer@cox.net, which will be on the screen occasionally. Tell me of interest you have on the show, and maybe we'll find another subject to discuss. An update on one of our previous shows with Nick Beeson. Nick was a person who was on here, and he's involved with Families Act, and it's a group that's trying to get mental health care expanded in the Santa Barbara County area, and hopefully to get the Board of Supervisors to take some of the money from the jails and put it into housing and caring for the mentally ill that are now presently in the jail and don't need to be there. Nick is still working on this, and it's still pending, and if you're interested in this, as many people have contacted me and said they were, you could contact him at 455-3218, it's his home number, or Families Act. Again, Google searches Families Act with an exclamation point, and you can get information about that effort. It's a good effort. So this show started in my mind last summer. I was sitting in a restaurant near the Presidio, and then all of a sudden there are these people dressed in sort of outfits with carrying long rifles, and they were marching by, and I'm thinking to myself, oh no, there goes another pseudo-historical. I'm a history major, by the way, as an undergraduate, so I'm not hostile to the idea of history, but it seems that we have this fascination with things military in this country. And so they marched by, and then pretty soon a cannon went off, and I realized it was associated with the Presidio, which is Spanish for a fort in the area. And the city of Santa Barbara has rebuilt that area as a tourist attraction and is working. And I got to thinking, well, it's sort of offensive. The Presidio wasn't there that long, and the Chumash, whom the Presidio was directed to deal with, to a certain degree anyway, have been there a long time. And I was aware that there was a thing called the Chumash Uprising. And I remembered other people telling me about it, but it's one of those things that just sort of floats around Santa Barbara. Some people hear about it once in a while, are surprised by it. But I looked into it, and it turns out it was in March of 1824 is a date I've been given. So we're going to have this show on in March of 2014, so it's 190 years anniversary, so to speak. And I found Dr. Johnson from the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, who knows a lot about this event, I think, and invited him here. Welcome.
Thank you.
How did you get involved in studying the native populations of the Californias or the area?
Well, I grew up in Southern California, and when I came to UCSB, I participated in some of the archaeological digs that were going on on the weekends, the archaeology field class. Mm-hmm. I also worked in Arizona, New Mexico on various archaeology projects for 4 summers. And I ended up getting my bachelor's from UCSB, and then I went off and did other things for a while. I got to work for Los Padres National Forest doing archaeological survey work, and that made me realize that I wanted to do this as a profession. So I went back then to graduate school, UCSB, and as I was finishing up there was a job opening at the Museum of Natural History, and I applied for it, and so I've been at the museum now for 28 years, just about.
And just not to get too far off the subject, but you're also studying the major issue of the remains of what is apparently the oldest surviving evidence of a human presence in the Americas.
Right. Actually, I'm doing work at Arlington Springs on Santa Rosa Island, and we've had 6 field seasons out there at Arlington Springs studying the earliest evidence for people on the Pacific coast. And it's at that same location that back in 1959 some human skeletal remains were discovered that are the oldest dated human skeletal remains in the Americas, dating back, we now believe, to right around 13,000 years ago.
Which sort of brings me to my polemic here, I guess you might be. That is part of the native population of the Americas, at least the oldest oldest populations we know of. And of course the Spanish came much later. But one of the things that I have a hard time getting my head around is that the Spanish came, let's say 1492, we had Columbus going into the Caribbean, and then the Spanish conquest of Mesoamerica, of the central part of the continents, and they sort of halfway just ignored, it seems to me, the North American expansion, so that the Spanish didn't have much of a presence in what we now know as California until 1600s, 1700s. Well,
there was, of course, the first Spanish expedition to come up here was Cabrillo in 1542. But, and then some years later, Vizcaíno in 1602, he's the one that named Santa Barbara. He was here on St. Barbara's Day. But the actual settlement, colonization of California, it didn't take place until beginning 1769 in Alta California.
Right, which, we see those signs on the missions. I think Mission Santa Barbara is 1786 or 1776 or something like that.
1786.
86. Yes. So it's about the time the American Revolution was being fought on the West Coast, East Coast. But up to that point, the Spanish were ostensibly the colonial power owning or claiming this area. They didn't try to do much about managing or controlling or the populations.
The whole idea of the missions was to, settle California, sort of pacify California, so it would be a safe location for the Manila galleons as they came across from the Philippines. If they needed to put in at a port, they could put into California, and it would prevent, by the Spanish settlement of California, prevent the Russians from moving into California, because the Spanish
and the British, I think, also.
Yeah, the Spanish crown was quite concerned because the Russians had moved into Alaska.
Fort Ross in Northern California was maybe a little later, but yeah.
That was later, but yes.
But there was because everybody was sort of coveting this area. But up to this point, is what I'm saying, unlike parts of Central America where the Spanish had a couple hundred years of basically exploiting the land and sort of controlling the population, there was almost nothing like that happening here.
Right. There had been settlement in Baja California for about not quite a century before they started to move up here into Alta California.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the settlement process of the Spanish, as I understood it and correct me if I'm wrong, was that the mission system was they would build missions or religious institutions for the purpose of converting the natives of the native population to Catholicism. That was the Crown's instructions, and to exploit property and land and try to make money off of it. And they would willfully, intentionally break up native tribal groups and put them into these complexes around the missions.
Right. The process of founding the missions and developing the missions, and native people coming into the missions actually occurred over a 50-year period. And in the Chumash Indians, coming into the missions occurred over a 50-year period. Mm-hmm. So there was, it didn't happen overnight, and it was actually against Spanish law to force anybody to be converted, but that being said, there were certainly the changes that came with the coming of the Presidio and the mission here locally set in motion events that eventually led to people coming to the missions. I think I like to say by force of circumstances, you know, because their lives were forever changed with some of the with the grazing animals that would feed on the plants the Indians used to use for gathering wild seeds, wild grains, you know, for their subsistence. Mm-hmm. You know, there were other changes with the introduced European diseases causing a heavy mortality among the native population. And so over time, you know, really the best option that people had was to associate with the missions because it would have been very difficult to maintain their way of life they were used to after these changes had come about.
At least in some parts of the Americas, I read instructions saying that the Crown had instructed the local emissaries, powers, to actually physically burn and destroy camps of the native populations so they would not have a place to go back to and have to be forced to be in the cultural center. And there was another uncommon, I can't remember the name of it, but a economic concept of where they would be supervised by Spaniards and put to work, or not enslaved, but put to work in a way to and allow them to be converted for a period of time. Actually, some very humane conditions, relatively humane compared to what some of the American slave systems provided for their peoples. Right. But still, they were to be. The purpose of it, as I've understood, was to, number one, find resources for the Crown. And down in the central and southern part, it was gold and other minerals and wealth. I'm not sure what it might have been up here, but also to save souls, so to actually try to convert people to their form of religion.
Yeah, there was not any, you know, the Indians in California were hunters and gatherers. Right. They didn't practice agriculture. So the burning of fields and so on, that was done by some of the early explorers in the southeast, you know, like De Soto, mm-hmm. for example, mm-hmm. and they fought with the Indians, and yeah, all kinds of depredations were done. It was actually a missionary named Bartolome de las Casas down in who was down in Guatemala, and he was upset by the slavery, basic mm-hmm. enslavement yeah. of the native peoples, and went and eventually lobbied the king and had the laws of the Indies changed so that there would be no forceful conversion. So some of what you're talking about, I think, occurred in the early years, not so much in the time period we're talking about in California.
Oh no, I know it's not. Yeah. In fact, in the early years, I was surprised to see that the King of Spain in the very early years, early 1500s, tried to issue edicts, the laws of Burgos and others, to really control the exploitation of the native population that he'd heard reports were being so badly abused, and these were often ignored by the owners of the lands, or not the owners of the claimants, the Spanish claimants of the mm-hmm. land, who wanted to get more out of the workers. But so anyway, so I'm wondering what happened in California that led this. Number one, we know that the Spaniards wanted to get presence here to protect their claims against the other colonial powers, the British and the Russians that might want it. There wasn't a lot of wealth they were trying to extract from this country.
Right.
But they did feel the need, and they also had this overwhelming idea that the purpose of the royalty was to convert people to Catholic faith. I mean, that was part of their purpose. Right. So they then created the missions, Father Serra and whatnot. We had in this area, we had San Inez in Solvang area. It is now
Solvang. The first mission in the area where Chumash languages were spoken, and there were more than one Chumash language.
More than one Chumash group.
Yeah. But there was 1772 Mission San Luis Obispo, which was founded when Junípero Serra was president. And then in 1782, Mission San Buenaventura was founded, and the Santa Barbara Presidio. And then in 1786, Santa Barbara, 1787, La Purísima near Lompoc, and then finally, a number of years later, 1804, Mission Santa Ynez.
Oh, okay.
And,
So these were all within walking distance, were relatively, they could relatively get to one another.
they were all in communication with each other.
In
And
San Diego, there was a mission in San Diego. Was that the headquarter mission?
that was the first founded in Alta California.
Right.
But the head mission for many years was up at Carmel.
No, okay.
That's where the Junipero Serra was stationed, and then his successor was stationed there.
So these missions functioned from the 1770s, 1780s, when they were being built, and up into modern times. But somewhere in the 1800s, we have reports of unhappy natives.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know any mission that didn't have unhappy natives at some point.
There was actually, they maybe killed a friar or more in San Diego in the early 1800s.
There was a Father Ponto in San Diego. Well, there's actually two fathers. There was in the earliest years, right around 1776, there was a uprising and an attack by the Indians around San Diego against the mission, and the missionary was killed, Father Jaime. And then, but much later on, there was actually the personal cook of the missionary poisoned Father Ponto, and because he felt he'd been mistreated by that particular missionary, and so there was more than one missionary that lost his life.
So what would and then in Santa Barbara, just to bring us to our in March of 1824, there was in the Santa Barbara area, there was what we've called the Chumash Uprising, in which some of the local Chumash behaved badly, caused a disturbance. The Presidio marshaled itself and confronted them. Is that right?
Well, actually, it was February 21st.
February 21st, okay,
a Sunday.
A Sunday.
At Mission Santa Ynez, when the revolt, the uprising broke out, and it then spread to La Purísima Mission and to Santa Barbara Mission. San Buenaventura Mission did not participate, the Indians down there, but the original outbreak was caused by an Indian who was visiting from La Purísima, one of his relatives at Santa Ynez, who was in the guardhouse, for some infraction. We don't know what it was, and he went to talk to his relative, who's in the guardhouse, and the soldier had the visitor whipped.
I see.
And that led to, everyone was upset because there's no reason to whip this guy. He just wanted to talk to his relative. And so it then led to the buildings at the mission being set on fire.
In the La Purísima.
At Santa Ynez.
Santa Ynez.
And then a messenger was sent to Santa Ynez. Some Indians were killed. A messenger was sent to La Purísima, and then the Indians there joined the Indians at Santa Ynez. They took over Mission La Purísima, and there were 4 visitors who happened, just travelers, came by, who were then attacked by the Indians of La Purísima and killed.
Spaniards,
yeah, Spanish Californians. And then at Santa Barbara received word that, kind of exaggerated accounts of what had been going on at Santa Ynez, and they were told by the messenger that was sent, oh, the soldiers are going to come and kill you all. So that the Indians of Santa Barbara were quite upset, and the soldiers who were on guard at Mission Santa Barbara, they went to them and they took away their weapons and sent them back to the Presidio.
Who took the weapons?
The Indians at Santa Barbara Mission.
Took the weapons.
And sent the soldiers, and so then they told the missionary who was at Santa Barbara, one of the missionaries was away, the other one was there. They told the missionary, we're not going to hurt you, and they even locked up the church so no one would break things in the church, and they left that missionary alone. But the soldiers of the Presidio then came up, and they actually found some old Indian who was just living alone in his house, and they killed him, and then there was this big battle that took place between the soldiers and the Indians, and the Indians in Santa Barbara then fled over the mountains.
The mountains that are showing behind us as we watch this show.
Yeah.
And they went out to other population. They went and joined another population across in Tulare.
Right. Many of the Indians from Santa Barbara and some of those from Santa Ynez went across then to the southern San Joaquin Valley to an island that was in this big lake that existed.
It used to exist.
Yeah, and they call it the Polaris. And the island was they fortified the island.
Oh, they did prepare some defense?
Yes, they did. And in fact, the first, they sent troops out there to try and defeat them, and they actually defeated the troops the first attempt, and one soldier was killed.
Really?
And there was also at La Purísima mission, the Indians there tried to barricade and take over that mission, and they eventually were surrounded, and a party of soldiers up from Northern California came down and they surrounded the mission, and then they surrendered after some exchange of
Was there ever, I mean,
fire.
this time-wise was a few months from the first incident you described to whatever the reconciliation was?
Well, this is at La Purísima. It was just a few weeks later, but the Indians from Santa Barbara stayed in the southern San Joaquin Valley until June of 1824.
Okay, so several months. What I'm trying to get more information about is whether there was some list of demands. Was there some issue other than the fact that we just don't want to be abused by you, or was there some more specific complaint?
Well, I don't know of any list of demands, but there appears to be a number of underlying factors that we can point to as being causing the revolt. And for example, what happened was in 1810, the supply ships that were coming up from Mexico ceased coming to Alta California. Alta California became completely cut off.
Oh, really?
Because of the Mexican Revolution against Spain. And one of the first things that happened was they captured the ports and the ships on the west coast of Mexico.
And this was, if I might say, this 1824 date is after the Mexican independence occurred.
Yeah.
So the Alta California was part of Mexico at that point.
Right. A few years earlier, the Mexican War had ended, or the War for Independence had ended. But during that whole period, up until 1822, California was cut off from Mexico, and all of the burden for supporting the soldiers and their families fell upon the missions and fell upon the Indians who were working at the missions. They were actually completely supporting the Spanish colonists during that period of time, and it was at the same time that the population was declining at the mission because of the introduced diseases.
Yes.
And so while there's fewer able-bodied people, there's increased demand for work, and so there was a lot of stress and strain during that period of time.
Well, I know we have a very limited time on a show like this, so what I'm trying to get to, I guess, is was there a just general anger about being impressed into a mission life and being exploited by the Spanish or the Mexicans, or was it more the kind of, okay, you've gone too far now? It wasn't so bad 10 years ago, but you've gotten more and more demanding, you've gotten more and more cruel. Is there some specific way that the native population would have been happier if they had been allowed to go back to what they had, or were they happy in this hybrid life, or what? Do we have a sense of whether the Chumash wanted to get rid of the Mexicans and get rid of the Spanish?
I think they did want to get rid of the Spanish. The problem, but I don't think necessarily that the revolution was against the missionaries in any sense. The missions.
The uprising.
The uprising, excuse me. What it was against the soldiers that they felt mistreatment and were being abusive at the mission. That's what immediately caused the revolt. And I think by the time 1824 comes along, the Indians who were adults at that time had lived in their entire lives under the mission system.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And they were the leaders, and so they were to a certain extent not too different than the colonists at that point, and yet they were...
In fact, they were married to the soldiers. A lot of women were married to the soldiers, I understood?
Not too many.
Not too many.
No. There were very little intermarriage, actually.
Really?
Yeah. There's a couple cases. But actually, one of the soldiers at the time of the revolt was half Chumash, for example.
Oh, the other way around. Yeah.
His father had married an Indian woman, and he was a soldier at the Presidio. But there was, I think, they had just seen the example of Mexico achieving its independence from Spain, and I think that was also an influence. You know, they were thinking, well, maybe we're more numerous than these people who are guarding us. We are just as intelligent and civilized as they are. You know, why are they
in charge?
Mistreating us? Yeah.
So in a minute or two we have left, real quickly, when the population that exited Santa Barbara went out to the Tulare Lake area, and then when there was a negotiation, they fought back, and they were somehow talked and convinced to return to Santa Barbara. Was there a compromise there, or was that just they just got tired of being in the other part of the world?
Well, the governor of California was, Mexican governor of California at that point was Arguello, and Arguello gave them a general amnesty. And so the missionaries, the president of the missions at that time, Father Soria, and also the missionary at Santa Barbara, who was quite sympathetic to the Indians. He took the Indian side during the uprising. They went out there and they did the negotiation with the leaders of the Indians, and I think the respect that the Indians had for those two individuals, as well as the general amnesty that was given, you know, they then returned to Santa Barbara.
So there was no general feeling that this was an abuse of the Catholic Church. It was more the governance of the militarists and the leaders of the governing bodies that had abused or overworked or taken advantage of the natives.
Well, I think the feeling is there were certain soldiers that had been abusive. And one of the interesting things about this revolt is it's kind of a Rashomon kind of situation.
We looked at it, yeah. Well, we've got 40 seconds here, so I'm going to
stop
it up. But people have asked me whether the Catholic Church has ever apologized for this. Was there any reason why the Catholic Church would feel the need to apologize for this?
Apologize for the Chumash Uprising?
Yes, for the abuses that led to it.
Well, I don't know that
I got you this question too late. We'll talk about it another time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Liz and Juanita and Ali Adachak for your work on the back room there, and maybe we'll have to follow this program up with a little more explanation another time. Thanks for watching The Next Step.